Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the July meeting of the Finance Committee. I declare the meeting open and call for any apologies. I have an apology from the Deputy Mayor, Chesterman. Are there any other apologies?
I'll move.
Thank you. And Councillor Gallagher for lateness. He's on his way, so I'll also include Councillor Gallagher for a late apology. The Mayor has moved. Do I have a seconder, please? Yep. Thank you, Councillor Tooman. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Confirmation of the agenda, which is item 2. I'll move. Thank you. Have a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Young. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? All right. Public forum. We have 2 speakers in the public forum today, Gail Gilbert and Jenny McGee from Age Concern. Councillors, you'll be aware that a letter from Age Concern was circulated with this agenda. So I'll ask the 2 ladies if they'd like to come forward, and you have up to 3 minutes to speak, and followed by any questions that councillors may wish to ask.
Thank you, Councillor Pascoe. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for giving us a few minutes of your time. I'm Jenny McGee. I'm the President of Age Concern Hamilton, and with me today is Gail Gilbert, who is our CEO. The relationship between Hamilton City Council and Age Concern Hamilton goes back 25 years, and since your earliest time, since we began looking in the 1990s at setting up an organisation that would provide support and encouragement for the older people in our community, Age Concern and Hamilton City Council have had a tremendous relationship. And in return for that support, we have been able to encourage and advise and be, I guess, a listening ear in the community for council as you engage with the older people in this community. In 2004, that relationship was formalised with a with a service level agreement, and that relationship protocol that goes with that agreement, which is still in force into earlier this year, talked about Age Concern and Hamilton City Council working together towards the vision, goals and outcomes of the HCC 10-year plan. This relationship matters. It matters to us as Age Concern. It matters to Hamilton City Council for its relationships with the older people in our community. But most fundamentally, it matters to the older people we serve. This service level agreement covers 3 key areas. It's around education, around exercise and events, the 3 E's. Now you might be wondering and thinking, yes, but 60 plus and U3A do education. Our focus in these programs is on practical support, practical ideas, practical terms to help older people live independently and successfully within this community. Our focus is very much on inclusion. Earlier in this year, in conversations that Gail had with Andy Mannering from Community Development, there was a clear indicator that our reputation as an organisation had meant that this service level agreement would be considered to be continued, provided that we met the criteria, which we had. Now, you're all aware that the change in funding application process for community funding has meant that it's gone online, and that, in fact, has been our downfall. That when that online funding application opened, we made an error. We made a really clear error, and in misinterpreting the rules or the guidelines around that, we put no application in. It didn't mean that we didn't want the relationship and the service level agreement. It simply meant that our error was in not making the funding application. Actually, when we realised that we hadn't made the application and we needed to, it left us speechless, to say the least. Council funding is a core part of our operational costs. It enables us to reach over 10,000 people, participants in the programs, and this era leaves the 3 areas of education, exercise and events unfunded. So our request to Council today is that you accept this, our late application, and help us by supporting the reinstatement of the service level agreement for the next 3 years. Thank you, Councillor Pascoe. I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. I'll ask elected members if they have any questions to ask. Councillor McPherson.
Jan, thanks. Given the earlier discussion you'd had before the deadline came up and your sort of thinking on that, did you receive any calls from staff working in the council staff, sorry, so just before the thing's closed saying, hey, your application hasn't come in yet, what's happening, or anything sort of partnership sort of related reminders?
No, there was nothing, but then, you know, this is our responsibility.
I understand that, yeah. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? All right, thank you very much for presenting to us today. My intent is that we will consider your request, which I think is the request is in paragraph 3. We ask the Finance Committee to reverse the decision to decline our late application. We'll consider that later in the meeting in the public excluded part of our meeting. So thank you for attending this afternoon and presenting to us.
Sorry, just a point on that, Mr. Chair. Are we not dealing with the report that for approval on these grants, on the overall amount, isn't there in the public section?
It is, but there is also the declines in the public excluded.
But this is
but given that the applications were originally considered in a public excluded environment, it's my view that it's appropriate that we should be considering this decision also in that in that public excluded environment.
But any decision we make in that area may affect ones we've already decided or approved at an earlier stage of the same meeting. So I understand the point you're making. I'm not even arguing with that. I'm perhaps arguing with the order. We might be dealing with the two. I mean, there's all sorts of outcomes.
Yeah, and there are
some of them would affect the list that's already there, given that there's a total pool, is what I'm.
Yep. And there are a number of outcomes that might come from a discussion of this, perhaps in a public excluded environment, in terms of where this request might transverse to.
So should we not hold the substantive item of approving that list of multi-year grants and multi-year community grants over until after we've at least had that discussion and know whether there's any effect or not? It's messy in terms of public excluded, not public excluded, but I don't want to, I think it would be unfortunate if the discussion in public excluded was coloured by people feeling, well, we've granted the whole 868,000, there is no more, when, you know, we've done that sort of 10 minutes later we go into public excluded and we don't have an option.
Understand that. Except we have got $30-something thousand which has been carried over from the long-term grants into the single-year grants.
Yeah, the request though is for a 3-year contract. That's the right
At this stage, we haven't got an application from Age Concern.
Yeah, well, they
That's
can't.
my understanding, that we haven't got the application, so.
Well, they can't put one in because the facility's no longer open online because it was an online system.
Yeah. My preference is that we consider it in public excluded.
That's not what I'm asking about, Mr. Chair. I'm asking about the order we do it. I think it's fairly simple. Look, there's a proposal here that we accept a list here of grants within the 868,000 packet, and they're 3-year grants. I think they're all 3 years.
And 2 separate reports, yeah.
So if we approve that, then at least the majority actually of what the group has just asked for in their presentation wouldn't be available within that budget.
Sorry, are you saying that if we approve the bulk amount, it predetermines that the money's gone, the budget's gone?
Yeah,
okay, I understand.
So that may be an argument that people like to consider at that. So I would have said, if there's any chance of that outcome being discussed, why don't we discuss this situation? And I'm not talking about the public exclusion, I'm talking about the order of it. Why don't we discuss the specific one first?
Yeah, I just perhaps ask Deanna. Can,
Sorry, Dave, just to be clear, it's your contention we don't even have the capacity to consider this if we...
Once we approve that,
If we
yeah.
approve that first, okay, so...
Can you repeat the question, sorry?
yeah, the question is that, and I think, and correct me, Councillor McPherson, if I've got it wrong, but after having approved items 14 and 15, we have thereby, if you like, spent the allocated funds for the community grants, meaning that we no longer have funds available that could be considered to be made available to Age Concern if a positive outcome as far as Age Concern was subsequently considered.
If I may, through the chair, if I just advise council that the allocation committee for allocating the funding, whether it be single year or multi-year grants, they have the delegated authority to approve the applications. So the report that you have sitting in front of you is for your information and for the endorsement of that. So the allocation and the approvals have already been made through the allocation committee because they've got delegated authority.
Okay, so in other words, that it's a done deal in terms of
Horse has bolted.
14 and 15.
That's correct. What you have sitting in front of you, the $868,000 has been approved, but to be allocated to those applicants who have been successful, that's correct.
Okay, so in other words, a decision to provide some aid or help to the Age Concern would have to come from elsewhere,
Or from the 32.
or from the 32,000.
Okay, I accept that, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. All right. Okay, thank you, ladies. All right, so the next item is item C5, which is the open minutes of the Finance Committee, and we have two sets of minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of May 2015 and the meeting held on the 7th of July 2015. Councillor Mallett would like to add an additional comment to be made in the minutes of the 7th of July.
Yes, thank you, Rob. It's page 20, councillors, bullet point 7, which is about halfway down the page, and it starts with the word liability. And I would simply be adding to what is written there. So currently it says liability, dash, it had always been confirmed that the HCC had no liability or underwriting responsibilities. I would then add to that the words, with regards to the BNZ loan funding, with regards to the BNZ loan funding the construction of the Tetra Pak building. So it's just to make it quite clear what we're talking about. So it's not an error in the minutes, it's probably just adding a little bit of clarity to...
So subject to that additional comment in the minutes, would somebody who was present at both those meetings please move those minutes, both sets of minutes, as a true and correct record? Councillor Mallett, do I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Tooman. Those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Item C6 is the Finance Committee action list open, which is on page 12. And the recommendation is that the report be received. I'm happy to move if there are no questions, no comments. Questions? All right, there being no questions, I propose to move that the report be received. I have a seconder for that, please. Thank you, Councillor Green. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 7, the recommended dates for reports to be presented to the Finance Committee. Again, take that report as being read and that the recommendation that the report be received. I will so move. Councillor Mallett has seconded. Those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Against? Carried. Item number 8 is the 10-year plan monitoring report with results up to the 31st of May for the 11 months. I'll ask the CFO, Paul Conda, if he would present some verbal comments around the presented report to elected members.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and councillors. The monitoring report presented this month is for the 11 months end of 31st of May 2015. It is therefore the smaller report that we use between quarters. This is the same approach that was used last year as we went into the year-end process. As May is the last month, though, prior to our financial year-end, we have included an updated risks and opportunities schedule. This has some additional information that was available subsequent to the audit and risk meeting, where you saw the risks and opportunities schedule last time. As we have now passed the financial year-end, I do not propose to spend a great deal of time on the May results, but I would like to take the opportunity to update the committee on the likely year-end outcome. Our year-end procedures are now well underway. Audit New Zealand will commence their audit on the 3rd of August. In sharing the preliminary numbers, I will caution that year-end procedures are such that they will generally result in a small reduction from the preliminary result that I'll talk about in a moment. This is because accruals and digital invoices, supplier invoices, and impairment reviews are generally the last things that are completed ahead of the financial statements, and this is true for most organisations. The preliminary result for the 30th of June 2015 is a balancing the books surplus of $4.5 million and an accounting surplus of $8 million. The major variance since the May risks and opportunities schedule was prepared, that is included in your pack, is the vesting of the Clarence Street Theatre into the trust. The year-end debt to revenue ratio is likely to be around about 188%. And total overall debt is $368 million, an improvement of about $49 million compared with the original annual plan figure. This is improved because of a better opening position in July 2014 of $14 million, the improved financial performance over the course of the year, approximately $9 million, asset sales of $9 million, and savings on capital projects of about $1.8 million, and the proposed deferral of capital expenditure approximately $15 million. A further $18 million is reflected in the increased cashback reserves, primarily the municipal fund from asset sales within that fund. The final capital expenditure at 30th of June is $58.3 million, which is similar to the figure that is projected at the end of May. Net deferrals totaled $15.2 million, including the items listed at paragraph 81 of the report, most notably the Rototuna Reservoir and the bulk water mains and the final stage of the Hamilton Ring Road. In total, 15 items are likely to be requested to be deferred. In conclusion, the year-end result is going to be positive and will reflect the excellent work that has been put in by Council and the staff over the last long-term plan. In relation to the May results, I'd just like to bring to your attention one item, and that is at paragraph 58, where we have made an adjustment for the annual leave provision to reflect an under provision previously made in relation to annual leave that accrues during the maternity leave period. This affects 49 employees, and the value is about $174,000. This has resulted from a legislation change that occurred in 2003 in the way that annual leave entitlement was calculated while somebody was on maternity or paternity leave. And it was picked up following the introduction of the new payroll system, and post-implementation checks showed that it actually should have been backdated to 2003. I can't conclude as to whether or not it was something that the software supplier of the time should have been picking up, or whether it's something that Council should have been amending. But from our perspective, we do have an increased liability as a result. Other than that, the results that we're presenting for May are similar to those that we presented in prior months, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor McPherson.
Just a small one on that maternity leave, if I could, Paul, please. Are you saying that our liability extends backwards over previously completed, quite a number of previously completed years, and we'll have to fine people in some cases and pay them additional amounts?
Yes, and there is about $174,000 in liability, so it's actually relatively small. It affected 49 employees. It is a change that should have been picked up in 2003, and if that change had been made at that time, then the leave would have been calculated correctly in 2004, 5, 6, all the way through. So unfortunately, it is something we are booking this year, but we need to have the balances going forward correct.
So we will be finding people who are not still employees and paying out up extra amounts in some cases.
I would have to double check that as to whether or not any previous employees have been affected and what has occurred there. Sorry, I don't have that answer in front of me.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of when someone leaves, they get a full and final sort of settlement of their outstanding salary and entitlements, but they didn't actually. So, yes.
I'd normally refer this to the general manager for that area, but he's unfortunately not here. But it is my assumption that we would be backdating that, yes.
And it's my understanding, councillor, that it's reasonably complicated, because if the employee didn't return to work at the end of the maternity leave period, then of course the amount isn't payable. So it really is for somebody who resumes their employment at the end of the maternity leave period.
Dave, would you repeat what Rob just told you then?
Some council IT person has changed these so that they ring when someone phones you, your iPads.
Certainly mine too.
Okay, do we have any other questions of Paul? Yeah, councillor.
Just one other. This maternity leave, which goes back to 2003, did they not change to parental leave, whereby the partner, well, how do I explain this? The father of the child also gets parental leave as well?
Yes, that's correct.
For about a 6-week period, I recall.
Yeah, so it applies to both male and female parents. Yes.
So would that not be higher than a total of 49 employees over the about a 12-year period?
My understanding from the information I have from the payroll department and the HR team is that it affects 49 people and a total cost of $174,000. So.
Procreating very quickly, aren't they?
Sorry, Leo, is your question presumably you're assuming 49 people are 49 women, and you're saying there could be some husbands whose wives, husbands who are staff, who took time off as well? Is that what you're saying? Is that how the law works?
49 employees are not broken down into male and female in the information I have, so I would assume that there will be at least some males in there as well.
Bruce Jenner doesn't work for us, does he?
Okay, questions, Your Worship?
We're dealing with this entire report, right?
Yes, we are. Yes, thank you.
I'll just pick up the line of thought about the maternity, or now called parental leave, because during that period of time since 2003, if Audit New Zealand, in carrying out their audit, they ever during that period of time identified that as an area that they needed to audit? Do you know?
Not to my knowledge, Your Worship.
So I would ask that that be checked, because I'd like to know that, because I'll raise it with them if that has been the case. Secondly, what internal mechanisms do we have in that area of our business that would, identify that we're doing these things correctly? What are the internal mechanisms?
I can only comment on relation to the payroll team. They do have a legislative compliance newsletter service that comes out from both the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and also from the Tax Department in relation to some of the tax matters, and those things are followed up to ensure that those changes are being put into the payroll system. Now, what I have not been able to ascertain is whether or not that check was done at the time, and whether or not the process change was actually made properly. We are talking some years ago.
So to answer the question then, the internal mechanisms we currently have in place to continually monitor and check the application of legislation or calculations is receiving a newsletter.
No,
Well, I want to know,
Sorry.
what are the internal mechanisms we have that enable these things not to happen again? What are they?
So yes, there are various newsletters that we would receive. We would also be monitoring legislation changes, particularly the Employment Relations Act, for any changes that may be impacting on these calculations. And then we would be working with the suppliers themselves around the payroll system to ensure that those changes are being booked correctly. And those would be tested as part of that process as well, to make sure that they are calculating correctly going forward. The previous system that was being used for payroll was the same as the finance system, and as I understand it, historically there has been a lack of patches and those sort of things being made. It is possible that this was one of those patches that should have been made, or it may not have been actually correctly supplied by the supplier. But from the new system point of view, we are confident that it is correctly calculating.
Yeah, I suppose it's a wider question. Perhaps if I ask it in a different way, what do we do today as an internal checks and balances mechanism that we have in place to avoid these sorts of things happening again? What is the mechanism for checking that we've got in place? Is it a person randomly checking? Is it Audit New Zealand occasionally? What is it?
Yeah, so the payroll staff themselves would be looking at any changes in legislation and having a review as to whether or not that is impacting on the calculations. We would also have a similar review process happening within HR, and then once those changes come through, they would be tested to make sure that they actually meet the legislation. There are various newsletters as well, as I said, that come through that highlight changes that are likely to have impacts. Those include the employment relations newsletters, the legislation updates, the updates from the employer associations. So there are a number of mechanisms that we're looking for finding information about changes and how they should be applied. And those are then tested once the system changes come through to make sure that they comply. So there are a number of mechanisms in place.
Okay.
Can I just...
I've got other questions, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, can I just add to that question perhaps? Do we, in terms of, do we have a maintenance contract with the software supplier where, from my recollection of work days, that they actually provided updates on a regular basis, so that every time there was a legislative change or a rate change, there were updates that automatically updated the software so that it did those calculations?
Yes, so that is part of the maintenance contract, is that any legislative change around tax rates or those sort of things are also updated into the system. The question going back to 2003 is whether or not one of those patches was missed at the time. I just cannot ascertain that.
Okay, thank you. Your Worship, you have some more questions?
Okay, page 32. Can you tell me at paragraph 24, what is the current debt to revenue ratio based on the May balance, debt balance, the debt to revenue ratio?
It's on paragraph 7 on page 30. 191%.
Yeah, 191% and that was down from April's 202%, and the end of June figure is 188%.
And what was it to be as against budgeted?
235%.
Can you just confirm to me on page 35, in terms of our commercial water rate and our wastewater, just on the revenue lines, just into the current long-term plan budget we've signed off, these adjustments have been taken into account, haven't they?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, okay, I just need to keep satisfying myself about that.
Yep.
Thanks. Can you explain to me what other subsidies and grants are slightly behind budget means on paragraph 44?
So
What are those other subsidies and grants?
there are a number of different subsidies and grants that are received for small capital projects.
We're talking minor amounts around about less than?
That's correct, Your Worship. Small amounts. The
Like-
largest two that we've had, I think, are in relation to the Bryce Street slip, and the other one would have been the Ring Road subsidy.
Yeah, no, so these are small grants under X amount of dollars. When you say they're slightly behind budget, what does that mean? Does that mean we're waiting to receive them, just haven't, or we're not going to get them, or what? I guess I'm not clear. What does that sentence mean?
Okay, so that sentence is saying that as of May, we had received less than we expected to get.
And the reason for that was?
Either we have not completed the work,
Yep.
or in some cases, we're no longer going to receive that amount. There was an amount budgeted about 3 years ago for that. Yep,
Right, and we've only just become aware that we weren't going to get that amount.
that's correct.
Yeah, okay. And none of those amounts are of significant materiality in terms of amount?
No.
Yeah, okay. To push the dial, so to speak. Okay. Yeah, I just query on paragraph 48, just about the forecasted depreciation. Just to explain to me what's happened there.
The depreciation forecast going forward is being impacted by asset revaluations. Some of those
Yes, I
asset
understand that.
revaluations are impacting on types of assets and classes of assets that are actually having a slightly higher rate than what the average is for the overall group of assets. So, for example, parks and gardens, there may be improvements that have a higher depreciation rate. Those are where the increase in valuation is occurring, and therefore that's having a flow-on impact into the overall
Yeah.
depreciation.
So they're only coming to knowledge, if you like, at the time of the valuation. Either value, I get that,
Yep.
but classification is a bit different.
Well, within any classification, there are various types of assets, and so you may have, for example, a fence, and you may have a park seat. Those may be being depreciated at a different rate, and if the mix has changed where the valuation is sitting, then that will be impacting on the depreciation calculation.
So I'm just looking for foresight, I guess, and when we become aware and when we make the changes. So these are things that weren't foreseen and only became evident through the revaluation process.
That's correct.
And there's nothing we can do to become more aware of them in anticipation.
We should be, we are working now to actually have those valuations available earlier in the year so that we
Yes.
can actually do those calculations.
Yes.
But it's very difficult forecasting a valuation 3 years in advance.
Yeah, agree. Okay, next question. Just have a question on paragraph 63, just about the advertising and marketing costs favourable, 609,000. So that's being used to offset increases in costs. That's why I'm reading that.
That's correct, Your Worship.
So I need someone from that area to talk to me about the choice of that, because this is in relation to Claudelands, isn't it?
It's in relation to the H3 events area, where they have been struggling this year to address some negative variances, as well as trying to find ways to actually offset these.
Yeah, no,
without
I
impacting on
understand
the
what's happening. What I'm interested in, though, is the huge importance to continue to generate revenue from H3 and the choice of advertising and marketing as a way to offset those increased costs when, it seems to me to be counterproductive.
Excuse me, Your Worship, you're talking about paragraph 63? 63, thank you.
And considering it's gone up from April to May quite considerably, so I want a better understanding of how what are the likely consequences? That's a considerable amount.
Yeah. In asking a very similar
What
question.
sort of areas have been cut in that area, in marketing and advertising? So is there someone here who can help with that?
Unfortunately, there isn't, Your Worship, but I do have some information.
Your Worship, we did, sorry, Paul, we discussed this.
I'm asking the CFO.
I have asked a very similar question of the team within H3 as part of the analysis of the results. They have assured me that it is not impacting on the winning of events and having events held in Hamilton.
And attendances.
A lot of the promotion of the actual events themselves are carried out by the promoter.
Yep.
These are more around marketing the venues to the promoters.
Right.
And they have been working through other mechanisms, including face-to-face meetings and those sort of things as well. So they've been trying to balance that without endangering any events coming to Hamilton.
Okay.
Can I just, Your Worship, do you mind if I just, we discussed this yesterday in our little offline meeting.
No, I don't need your feedback, sorry, Councillor Mallett. I'm asking questions of the CFO. If there's information that he's not sharing with me, well...
No, he wasn't at the meeting.
Right, okay, so he can answer the question. So if that's the case, then has someone spoken to the General Manager about whether the budget we've now put in for the next 3 years, is it too high?
Yeah, that discussion did occur as part of the long-term plan as well. They had in fact adjusted down their advertising budget to reflect the current approach they were taking.
Right, okay, good, okay. I've got a question in relation to the deferred capital expenditure, page 39 I'm looking at. I just want to make sure that the projects deferred 13-14 have in fact been completed, and the ones that are proposed to be deferred are 14-15.
I can't answer that question, Your Worship. I will ask the General Manager for infrastructure as to whether or not there's any deferrals for projects that are going from 13-14 through 14-15 to 15-16. The only one that I'm aware of would be in relation to the Ring Road.
That would largely be the answer. Most of the projects are not. There might be some of the integrated catchment management funding that might be coming out, but I'd have to look at that in more detail to answer properly. But generally, they're not projects that haven't been started or finished coming from previous years.
Okay, that's good. So perhaps going forward, we have the breakdown so that we can see that those that have been deferred through 1 year, I'm sure that no one would want them to be then deferred on for next year unless there was a really, really, really good reason why.
I agree.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Further questions of the CFO? Councillor Mallett?
Just a couple of points. The first one regarding to the issue with regards to legislative change. But we talked about it with regards to the parental leave, but what is our system for capturing any legislative change?
That was my question, but it just kept getting focused on payroll.
Yeah.
That was actually my question.
So how do we, and you said we get newsletters, so how do we